Thank you for those kind words, Sherry, and thanks to everyone who came out to see me, of all people, speak before you. I really appreciate that, and thank you to the Manassas Battlefield Trust. I want to congratulate them on their most recent victory of the Battle of First Manassas. The first being the one I'm talking about today, the second obviously being the one that happened a year after that. The third being when we somehow prevented Disney from tearing down this area and building a park. And most recently, there was actually, as everyone here is familiar with, the whole data center nonsense. So the war's not over yet, but the fourth battle has been concluded, and it seems like it was in our favor. So thank you, as I imagine everyone here has been a part of this. So Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great American military theorist, once noted, "The study of history lies at the foundation of all sound military conclusions and practice." Today's Marines are thus expected to absorb military history to grow what Marine Corps General James Mad Dog Mattis described as the 5,000-year mind, which is the idea that a constant study of military history, theory, and thought through research and reading will compound in the ability to use centuries of cumulative experience to make rapid, informed decisions on the battlefield. According to an article published in Leatherneck magazine, during the march up for Operation Iraqi Freedom, then Major General James Mattis referenced the concept when he was asked by a reporter about a very difficult decision he made in what seemed to be a very short time frame. The reporter marveled that it took him only 30 seconds to make the decision, but Major General Mattis corrected him by saying, "No, it took me 30 years to make that decision." The Marine Corps Association takes great pride in helping Marines grow their 5,000-year-old mind. And it was this purpose that prompted us to begin a series of battle study documentaries with the ultimate goal of providing a foundation from which Marines could advance their own study of key battles of history through staff rides and further reading. The Battle of First Manassas presented the perfect opportunity from which to launch this series. First, it was within driving distance, meaning that it was easily accessible for Marines stationed in Quantico as well as the nation's capital, and most importantly, the cameraman, who was operating on a budget of $0 when coming out to filming this documentary. Second, the battlefield itself is in pristine condition. Thanks to generations of stewards, Marines could walk the plains of Manassas and see the terrain as the men in blue and gray saw it, which holds an immense value in contextualizing the tactical choices for commanders on the ground. Third, having devoted much of my personal life since my youth to studying the American Civil War, I was ecstatic to tell a version of the story that has captivated me all these years. And I was happy to be reunited with such historical figures as P.G.T. Beauregard, William Tecumseh Sherman, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and Irvin McDowell. Finally, as the Marine Corps Association, it felt appropriate that our first full-length battle study be one featuring the exploit of Marines. When one thinks of the battles of the Corps, the mind is populated with names such as Belleau Wood, Iwo Jima, Way City, or Fallujah. However, the story of the Marines who fought in the first major battle of the American Civil War is often overshadowed, and I wanted all members of the Corps to better appreciate this lineage. I wanted them to know that they could follow in the footsteps of a prior generation of Marines without having to leave the continental US. The Battle of First Manassas ranks high among the topics for documentaries on the American Civil War. I had a difficult task of creating a film that could stand out among the rest. And the way to do this was to focus on our target audience, Marines. First and foremost, the purpose of this film is to prepare Marines to embark upon battlefield staff rides. Thus, the battlefield itself became the main focal point. Lines on a map mischaracterize the friction, uncertainty, disorder, and complexity involved in the nature of war. Visiting the battlefield allows Marines to envision the tactical value that Matthew and Henry Hill offered, the logistical difficulties of crossing Sudley Ford or the Stone Bridge, and how the reverse slope behind Henry House allowed General Jackson to deploy his smoothbore artillery to counter the rifled guns of the Union Army. I wanted Marines watching this film to be able to easily identify the landmarks and the stories associated with them when they set foot upon the Manassas National Battlefield Park. In a way, the battlefield became as central to the storyboard as the narrator, drawing all lessons and vignettes back to the places they occurred. When determining the narrative, I had to keep in mind the lessons I intended to impart upon these young Marines to help them succeed as warfighters. It was thus necessary that this production be a work of traditional military history, because although there is a time and place for new military history, analyzing social factors, political factors, economic factors in terms of greater understanding of the conflict, our Marines needed to understand the strategic, operational, and tactical implications of the battle. More importantly, though, it needed to be relatable in terms of Marine Corps doctrine, specifically the seminal document Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, Warfighting, which served as the basis for the narrative. The film begins by briefly contextualizing decades of civil and political unrest that preceded the American Civil War, not only to provide background information for the viewer, but to instill in Marines that the first central tenet of the theory of war, which states that war is an act of policy. Wars do not erupt within a vacuum and are always the culmination of competing political interests that have been unable to resolve their differences without lethal means. I then addressed the second tenet of military theory by describing the means of war, how both the Union and Confederacy scrambled to assemble conventional military forces to pursue their political objectives, which then turns to the third tenet, the spectrum of conflict, as this would be a large-scale war between near-peer powers, with both the Union and Confederacy amassing the largest armies present on the North American continent up until that point in history. Next, using the theory of war as outlined in warfighting, I distilled key lessons applying to the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of war. On the strategic level, which is roughly defined as the art of winning wars and involves establishing goals, assigning forces, providing assets, and imposing conditions on the use of force, it was important to demonstrate how Manassas Junction, with railroad lines running south to Richmond and west towards the Shenandoah Valley, was a vital objective strategically, necessary for any Union force moving on Richmond from the north. Additionally, in examining the strategic consequences of the battle, it was important to note how the Confederate victory at Bull Run and their failure to follow up on their victory largely failed to change the strategic situation, although it did delay the Federal advance towards the Confederate capital until the spring of next year. Marines need to understand the big picture of how the battle fit within the greater conflict. For the operational level of war, which includes deciding when, where, and under what conditions to engage the enemy in battle, we needed to discuss the local road network and how it influenced the decision of commanders on the battlefield. I needed to explain how the Confederate commanders used the railroads to rapidly shift troops from one front to another to mass forces. Finally, I also had to demonstrate how the Union line of march, particularly over Sudley Ford, caused unintended difficulties that directly hampered their tactical effectiveness. These are the types of issues the Marines face when attempting to link the tactical to the strategic levels of war. However, this film is perhaps the most detailed at the tactical level, defined as the concepts and methods used to accomplish a particular mission, since I wanted to provide Marines with as many leadership examples as possible to understand the decisions that resulted in Union defeat and Confederate victory. This also served as a means to discuss the nature of war, the idea of friction, uncertainty, fluidity, disorder, complexity, and violence and danger being inherent immutable factors of war at the most distilled level. To do this, I examined the concept of initiative and response. The former is briefly defined as dictating the terms of the conflict and forcing the enemy to meet you on your own terms, while the latter is how one responds when the opponent has the initiative. General McDowell, as the attacking force, seized the initiative by attempting to turn the rebel left flank before General Beauregard's Confederate forces could move. By stealing the march on the rebels, McDowell forced the battle to be fought on his own terms. However, once the initiative is seized, it must be maintained. And warfighting, the document, warns that every assault inevitably will reach its culminating point when it has reached its fullest potential. For McDowell at Bull Run, the Confederate response to his flanking movement stalled his advance to the extent that his army was nearly a spent force by the time they were ready to strike the killing blow by taking Henry Hill. Marines must understand the significance of giving your enemy as little breathing room as possible to ensure that they cannot in turn seize the initiative against oneself. The Marine Corps doctrine of warfighting also expects leaders to create a command climate that pushes initiative down to the lowest levels. Thus, I wanted to showcase successful examples of junior initiative, such as Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans' decision to intercept the Union flanking column with his demi-brigade of 2 regiments, which ultimately prevented the Confederate flank from being turned completely, as well as Colonel Arthur Cummings' assault on a section of Union artillery that threatened the Confederate defense atop Henry Hill. Likewise, I had to stress how seizing the initiative must fit within the overall commander's intent, and that there could be dire consequences in failing to do so, such as Colonel Erasmus Keyes' unsupported assault near the Robinson House, which squandered an opportunity to seize Henry Hill, or Colonel Charles Fisher of the 6th North Carolina and his disastrous events down Henry Hill, which resulted in his death and his unit being cut to pieces from three sides. Commanders must be empowered to make decisions on the battlefield, but these decisions must be well informed. Another factor regarding the theory of war, according to warfighting, I made sure to depict was how leaders created and exploited opportunities. Battlefield success often hinges upon subordinate commanders exploiting a brief window of opportunity. One example was Jackson's counterattack with the 4th and 27th Virginia. Seeing the retreat of the 14th Brooklyn Marine Battalion, Jackson ordered the two aforementioned regiments to rapidly pursue, which not only pushed the Federal infantry off Henry Hill, but also managed to capture a battery of their artillery. In exploiting this brief opportunity, Stonewall Jackson shifted the tide of the battle and brought more time for Confederates to mass troops to seize the initiative from the Union. The next aspect of warfighting that I wanted to address was his emphasis on surprise, which is based on speed, stealth, ambiguity, and deception. The Battle of First Manassas is characteristically remembered as perhaps the most confusing battle in terms of unit identification, with the unique uniform patterns causing significant command and control issues for each side, whether it be the Louisiana Tigers with their blue jackets being shot at by their fellow South Carolinians, or the 14th Brooklyn Marines suffering friendly fire after having been driven off Henry Hill. However, some Confederate units, particularly the Hampton Legion, repeatedly used deception and surprise to convince successive waves of Union troops, particularly in Sherman's brigade, that they were firing upon their own men. In doing so, they created an opportunity to deliver deadly volleys upon a confused enemy, thus repelling several assaults, using deception to the fullest advantage. Warfighting also teaches Marines that since war is a fluid phenomenon, its conduct requires flexibility of thought. Success depends in large part on the ability to adapt, to proactively shape changing events to our advantage, as well as to react quickly to constantly changing conditions. The Confederate victory at First Manassas was not the result of any grand plan or top-down leadership. Rather, it was achieved by subordinate commanders acting upon their own initiative with their superior commanders appropriately adapting to the tactical dilemmas they face. While General Beauregard originally resolved to fight the battle upon his own machinations, a bold and difficult to coordinate flanking movement, it was Johnston's decision to face the reality of the situation at hand which prompted him to declare, "I am going there," before riding to the sounds of the guns. Additionally, Union defeat can likewise be attributed to a rigid command climate that stifled proactive leadership. Whether it be Burnside's stalled advance against Evans, Daniel Tyler's delay in supporting the main effort, or McDowell's premature declaration of victory and failure to press his assault after driving the rebels off Matthews Hill, Marines must adapt to the reality of the situation on the ground, not the situation within their own mind. Focus is another crucial warfighting concept that I wanted to address, which is defined as the convergence of effects in time and space on some objective. It is the generation of superior combat power at a particular time and place. There's almost no better to describe this phenomenon than First Manassas. McDowell's flanking column repeatedly squandered its superior combat power through a lack of boldness and initiative. General Burnside failed to quickly bring his brigade into line to swat away Evans' two regiments at Matthews Hill, while Hunter failed to engage his men effectively at all. When McDowell finally rallied his forces to seize Henry Hill, his first assault was a mixed-match force from separate brigades, lacking the cohesion necessary to drive off the Confederates. One of the Union's final assaults on Henry Hill, led by William Sherman, was a piecemeal assault, with each regiment dashed against the rebels prepared along the heights. The Confederates, despite being caught by surprise, maintained a significantly better quality of command and control, with General Beauregard leading from the front and General Johnston directing troops from the rear. They were able to thus focus their combat power against the repeated, disorganized assaults of General McDowell. This is a crucial lesson for all Marines, who must rely on bringing all their combat power to bear upon their opponent at the most critical time and place. The Marine Corps has also been at the forefront of various technological innovations throughout its history, and warfighting warns that there are two dangers with respect to equipment: the over-reliance on technology and the failure to make the most of technological capabilities. In my film, I made a point to show how the Union artillery, the modern rifle guns of the era, was at a severe disadvantage when engaging in close-range duels against the smoothbore artillery that the Confederates had placed upon Henry Hill. The failure to properly understand the tactical limitations of their artillery, which were, again, a new concept for these soldiers, proved to be the undoing of Captain Ricketts and Griffin's batteries. Alternatively, The Confederacy skillfully employed new technologies by using the Manassas Gap Railroad to transport Joe Johnston's Army of the Shenandoah to the battlefield, with some units marching straight to the battle from the railroad junction, thus providing reinforcements for the climatic counterattack. As the character of war rapidly changes, Marines must find the best methods of employing new technologies, both commercial and military. To understand the results of the battle, I had to address warfighting's concept of center of gravity and critical vulnerability, which are described as the answers to the following questions. Which factors are critical to the enemy? Which can the enemy not do without? Which, if eliminated, will bend him most quickly to our will? The Confederate center of gravity was their interior lines and strong defensive position. This provided their greatest strength. McDowell sought to unbalance his opponent by a swift movement around their flank to target their lines of communications, which would either force the rebels to either fight in the open or retreat. Alternatively, the Union forces' center of gravity was their speed and the element of surprise, which offered them their greatest chance of success. By moving quickly to confront the Union flanking column, slowing them down at Matthews Hill, and then halting them at Henry Hill, the Confederates hit a critical vulnerability, sapping McDowell's initiative and allowing them to mass forces to launch a successful counterstroke. Finally, with today's Marines being the primary audience, this film is intended to distill within Marines a greater appreciation for their forefathers who fought at Manassas. The Marines of 1861 were largely raw recruits, with over a third of their pre-war strength joining the Confederacy. Most had not been in the military for months before, let alone had any combat experience of which to speak. Yet, just as today, Marines must be ready for any climb in place. And the Marine Battalion, commanded by Major John G. Reynolds, was attached to Colonel Andrew Porter's brigade to augment the Army force as they moved south. Despite this inexperience, the Marines performed as well as any regiment and even exceeded that of many. They helped drive the thin rebel line off Matthews Hill and mounted at least 2 sustained charges up Henry Hill into the teeth of Confederate artillery and infantry. In fact, one member of the 2nd Virginia later wrote, "The only men that were killed or wounded 20 to 30 yards behind and in the rear of our lines were the United States Marines." For the repeated assaults against Henry Hill, the Marine Battalion suffered 44 casualties, 9 of whom were killed outright. In the aftermath of the battle, the reputation of the Marine Corps suffered. Despite receiving praise in the official report from their brigade commander, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Colonel John Harris, remarked that the battle was the first instance in history where any portion of its members turned their backs to the enemy. Wow, that's rough. However, in relation to many other Union regiments at Manassas, the Marine Battalion ranks among the exceptional, considering the high-performing regiments such as the 1st Minnesota or the 14th Brooklyn. This was done despite little formal training and is impressive considering that other regiments, such as the 71st New York, I really hope y'all don't have any ancestors from 71st New York out there, were unable to get into formation when ordered to advance by their commander, Burnside. It should be no shame that the Marines were forced to retreat in the face of a rapidly deteriorating situation brought about by poor leadership. And it is no dishonor that one of the worst defeats suffered by the Marine Corps was brought about by a brigade of Virginians who formed one of the most elite units of the Confederacy and were led by perhaps one of the greatest generals in American history. Any Marine who faces a gargantuan statue of Brigadier General Thomas Stonewall Jackson needs only to glance over to the right to see where his fellow Marines made their furthest advance into Confederate lines during the first major battle of the American Civil War. This video was made for our Marines, and I hope it does enough to help foster their 5,000-year mind, so they may continue to be the most capable and fearsome warfighting organization in history. Thank you. Thank you. So to answer your first question, as an association, we are a nonprofit that directly supports the intellectual growth of the Marine Corps. And we do this primarily through a couple of facets. We have the Marine Corps Gazette, which is a journal that I'm an editor for. And it's the professional journal of the Marine Corps. So it's meant for Marines or members of the DoD or military at large, where you can write about ideas of how you can better improve the Marine Corps, improve leadership, improve tactics, etc. And it's an open forum, essentially, to allow debate, discussion, where anyone from up to the commandant, the president, those on the Hill, down to the lowliest private can be part of this discussion. And Our second aspect, though, is professional development and education, professional military education, and we do that, through a variety of Marines. We provide unit libraries for units that request them. We provide wargaming support, and additionally, we're trying to expand our reach into the digital realm. Most Marines have a smartphone, iPhone, etc. And how can we, get them to use the time that they're going to be on their social media technology to better further their study, almost as an underling. Because yes, we expect them to read, and we definitely encourage that. But if they might enjoy it in a more laid back fashion, watching a documentary or films, just to help continually build that 5,000 year mind, because you're not going to learn all you can need to know about any particular battle with just reading one book. When I do my tours at Brandy Station and Cedar Mountain, I'm constantly reading different books, and over time, things stick with you. Oh, I remember that regiment from this book, and here's their regiment history. So that's what we're trying to do in the Marine Corps Station: just create an environment, a learning environment, where you're just have a constant flow of information and learning. And to your second question, I am a member of the American Civil War Gaming Club. For all those who may be familiar, it's a gaming club based off of the John Tiller wargaming series, which has now been taken over by Wargame Design Studio. And again, with a budget of $0 and 0 cents, hiring a map maker to come in and do all the battlefield maps with units moving around different places was outside my budget. However, I'm a play tester with them, and I just asked the developer, "Hey, can I use your wargaming simulator to go ahead and create the maps? I'll give you a shout out." And he's like, "Oh, absolutely." And so that was great, especially because it allows you to have a visualization of the battle. And yes, I do want to note, lines on a map are misleading in many ways, because no unit is just standing in one place in a perfect line at any point. There's a lot of movement and fluidity involved, but they are crucial, though, in just contextualizing the situation, in which when you go to the battlefield, then you can see for yourself, oh, this isn't as clear as I thought it would be.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons when I said I had watched it 3 times, and if you see it, because he actually shows the battle map of the troop movements, literally. And so it really takes you a minute to absorb it all, because there's a lot of movement, and your brain is just kind of astounded with how much was going on at that battle, and how many moving pieces and how many different groups were going in different directions. And I think you fully get the scope of that from your demonstration of it. So I have a lot of questions, as William knows, but I also, at the same time, I want to let you all ask questions as well. So since I did one, I'll take an audience question, and then I'll do another planned one. Melissa.
Well, I just wanted to add on to what Sherry's saying, that I watched it and I love the use of the gaming technology, and that the video games, the viewpoint is perfect for the overview of it, and to see the movements of the troops. It's so different. We're all so used to studying it with battle maps and lines and hash marks and stuff, and it was just really cool to see it that way, and to see with the narration over top of it where you're moving the troops around, and just get that sense of exactly what was happening. Where again, usually we're sort of envisioning it with a static, illustration, and it was really cool just to see it that way.
Thank you.
I really commend you for the idea.
Yeah, so perhaps also because I grew up in Fauquier County. I've always had an affinity through the Civil War. As I mentioned to some of y'all earlier, that my dad showed me war movies at an inappropriately young age. So it's kind of I've been afflicted ever since then. And so the story of the first battle of Manassas, first battle of Bull Run, the American Civil War is truly the American Iliad. It almost seems like it was scripted from beginning to end, or just how the course of it goes, and how interesting and engaging the characters are, and the weight and consequence of it. And the first battle of Manassas, it's the kickoff to it. It's what almost changes how it changes instantly how Americans perceive this war that they're in, that it's going to be a longer conflict. And so on top of it, though, it was the aspect of the fact that the Marines did fight here. And that's something I didn't even know until, older. When I was younger, I came here. My dad was a Marine. He would, take me around the battlefield, never really talked about the Marines who fought here. And then one day I was actually on one of these wargaming situations for the Battle of First Manassas. I'm like, wait, there's a Marine battalion? Like, what? And then I sort of then, stuck with me throughout my youth into my adulthood. And then when I joined the Marine Corps Association, I wanted to be able to tell a story about Marines, but I've always been a Civil War buff. I do appreciate Marine Corps history, but Civil War is always where my heart's been. It's like, okay, I can finally combine these two things and get paid for it. So that was my thought process. So I came when I was studying in graduate, undergraduate. My professional military history was largely, hobbyist driven. With Because when I went to graduate school, it's primarily new military history that's in vogue these days. Traditional military history is less in vogue, and there's been a lot of consequences academically and in the military because of it. So when I joined the Marine Corps Association, I really got into doctrine, actually understanding the theory of war, the nature of war, and answering some of these questions I addressed throughout the film, and study the Marine Corps doctrine, which is maneuver warfare, which you know briefly condensed means push initiative down to low subordinates, and then using speed surprise to outcycle your enemy commanders to perform decisions faster, to force them into position where the system that holds them together falls apart. And I really hope my boss doesn't light me up for that, because that is probably not the wholly most accurate description of maneuver warfare, but that's it is. So for me, when I was examining the big picture of how McDowell's plan was, and his observe, orient, decide, act loop that he was performing as a commander, and how the biggest obstacle to that was Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans, who dude's an alcoholic Indian fighter. He's probably the scariest person in the American Civil War. I mean, look at his picture after this. Dude's terrifying. He could be in a horror movie. And how I mean, he did maneuver warfare perfectly. He left a holding force. He left a couple of companies to hold off an entire division of Union forces. Marches two regiments and artillery pieces across the battlefield. Intercepted the lead elements, which was Burnside gets hit on a lot. And I'm about to hit on him some more. I mean, you run into Burnside, yeah, he's going to take his sweet time to point his troops and get in line. And just by doing that, he offset this entire Union plan and, saved the Confederacy at First Manassas. So I think it was his story that I most grasped onto, especially because, there is no statue to him. I mean, there's Stonewall Jackson and Henry Hill, who looks like he could bench press 380 pounds, but you don't see, Nathan Shanks Evans, who really did as much as he did to win the victory for the Confederacy. So that was the story I think I grabbed onto most. Well, it goes back to that statue. Stonewall earned his statue, and in part of it because he received probably the coolest nickname that any general has ever received in history. But this perception, which is publicly driven, I mean, you have the books, that God's a General, the film, and the public perception of that is that Jackson's the one who saved the name. He saved the day. He got the nickname. He went on to be one of the most hardcore commanders. And again, he did earn his reputation here, and he did fight incredibly well. But I think the greatest misconception is that he's responsible for Confederate victory. Beauregard deserves as much credit, despite having crazy machinations of a plan that would really not work out. He was there on the front lines, adapted when it required of him, and was riding around. He was getting his horse was hit by a cannonball. He had a great leadership. Nathan Evans, another person I just previously mentioned. What his role was significant. And also, the fact that the final counterattack was because of the arrival of Colonel Koch, who you really don't hear about tons at all. In fact, his career after this battle, I'm pretty sure, ends really quickly. But it was actually his brigade that came in and did the killing blow. So it's just altering the public conception of the significance of particularly Stonewall Jackson, and relating it to the fact that it was because of various other successful subordinate leadership that Confederates won at the battle, as opposed to just one individual. All right, so I'm gonna have a lot coming for you. So through the Marine Corps Association, I run our Core Voices program, which are straight up interviews with Marine veterans, regardless of how long you served, where you served, or what extent you did serve. We put you in front of a camera and we let you tell your story as you see fit. I'll ask guiding questions. So that's an ongoing series we have. We have a couple really excellent ones coming down the pike that we'll release in the next few weeks. We also are doing a short series called TGD Tuesday. So you like tactical decision games. We have a short video that lays a situation out for you, and you're allowed to sort of make your own and write in the comments what you think you should do. With Cedar Mountain Battlefield Foundation, the dearest organization to me, we have a lot of great events coming up soon. In August, we're going to be doing our, it's called Fire and Steel, the story of the Stonewall Brigade and Rockbridge Artillery at Cedar Mountain, where we're going to do a specialized tour focusing on where those two units fought, as well as having living historians, including artillerists who are going to be doing a night shoot. So if you want those sweet, sweet social media pics for your young kids out there, come out to it. It's going to be fun. End of September, we're going to be doing Crawford's Brigade at Cedar Mountain tours. We're going to flip the script a little bit, talk about what the Union troops were up to in the most successful brigade at Cedar Mountain. And it's an incredibly riveting story. So I highly recommend y'all check that out. Personally, I have a series of videos coming out. It's called A Picture is Worth 1,000 Bullets, where I look at historical art and I talk about the history behind it and my thoughts and opinions as both a history piece and an art piece. I've done a lot on Treuting, and I'll probably have a few more coming down, so check those out. I'm also starting a new series that's going to hopefully come out soon. It's called On the Field, on the Record. The first video I'm working on right now is where I'm going to actually reading the official reports from the official records of War Rebellion of the 13th Virginia who fought at Cedar Mountain. And it was actually a unit where several of its companies were raised in Culpeper County. So some people were actually fighting on their home turf. I'm just going to go, compare the record report compared to where they were on the battlefield and do like a sort of battlefield walk. And then finally, not this weekend, but next weekend, I'll be speaking at the 165th anniversary of the Battle of Bull Run. I'll be doing a lecture both Saturday and Sunday on different topics. So if you have not, got your tickets for that yet, highly recommend it. It's going to be a great time. So that's what I have coming down. That's going to be, so they're doing it at Brandy Station in Culpeper County in Virginia, some near my home turf. They're doing it in proximity to the battlefield. I don't know how you know Brandy Station, but it's going to be near the St. James Church area, which because the terrain's similar. Right now, that land has not been turned over to the state park yet, so they're still able to do force on force events there. So, and on top of it, yes, it wasn't quite the same battle, but the terrain's similar, and it's on a battlefield. So it's going to be a fun time. Definitely check that out if you all are free next weekend.
No, it's on Facebook.
Yeah, look at Facebook and then also look at Culpeper Battlefield Tours. On our website, we have links and tickets to that there.